All right. Thank you, Professor Tootle. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to see you. We've had, I think, if a couple other of our team members were here, we've had 55 conversations, I think, or maybe it's 54, of wide variety of topics: history of LGBTQ, history of the Second Amendment and guns, history of war. Is America a good country? Are Americans good? Abortion. I guess we haven't done oil and gas or the history of energy policy, but anyway, we have done almost every topic under the sun. And I'm pausing this week because you asked an insightful comment. I can't remember, it was on Facebook or a message to me that said, "What are people thinking about? What are Americans really truly thinking about?" So I've spent the last 3 or 4 days wondering what Americans are truly thinking about, and also wondering whether our 53 to 55 conversations over the last 2 years actually make a difference. Do we care what George Washington thought, or that Martha sold the slaves after? Is important that the Declaration of Independence is done with some other country done it, or on and on and on. Rosa, you just go every imaginable topic we've had. Does it matter, or is there this tide of movement that things happen regardless of some historical figure or some historical happening? I mean, if you think about it right now, we're sending, and I'll be done in just a second, but we're sending M1A1 tanks to, we're not at war. Well, wait, we haven't declared a war since World War II. We haven't been in a war in a long time, or have we? It doesn't seem like things make sense, but we all kind of have this perpetual motion machine. Clearly, we're comfortable sending billions to Ukraine, and there's an occasional far right. I assume there's far left people that are against it too, but for the most part, we go on with our day. Well, we just kind of go on with our day. We don't call our congressman or congressperson and say, "Hey, I'm glad we're in Ukraine," or "I'm glad we're not in Ukraine, but we're supporting." It just seems like we all go on with our day. So that's the topic of this conversation, however we choose to take it, is what historical times that you can bring in. You said, what are we thinking about? You're not sure what Americans are thinking about? I can tell you all sorts of things. They're thinking about hiking the Colorado Trail, and should they bring a gun or bear spray? Or do they need to tie up their bags, or they not? Should they exercise more? With a rising cost of eggs? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff people are thinking about. But what are the really important things we're thinking about? And is there a group consensus? That's the question today. Is there a cultural consensus of what we're thinking about? Or is it all silly stuff? And what other times in history have there been similar things? So give a gut reaction to that.
Well, I mean, I guess that's why I asked the question of you, and then I don't remember if it was publicly or privately either, but I said basically I've had this feeling for many years that I'm so incredibly out of touch.
Well, you're a college professor, a PhD in history. Of course, you're out of touch.
Yeah. Well, those who learn history are doomed to watch in slow motion horror as people make the same mistakes over and over again. And even, there's an article or an opinion piece in the New York Times talking about the historical profession. I said something to my class last week where it was asking about being a historian or a history major. And I just kind of said, now that you ask about it in that way, I don't know that I can, I think that our society is basically trying to kill off the historical profession. Nobody wants us around. Everybody wants an advocate. Nobody's interested in long, slow, deliberate, hard work that doesn't flatter a particular political ideology. And thus the historical profession became highly politicized and then kind of ate itself. So I've never, in some ways, I've never felt less relevant in my profession. But at the same time, there seems to be a hunger for real history. If you look at the books that Americans actually read, it's political, military, and diplomatic history are almost always the the top substantive nonfiction books.
And Ken Burns keeps coming out with
Yeah,
amazing.
and documentary films. In other words, there's a hunger for history, but the system of higher education doesn't promote it anymore. So it's something that almost has to exist outside the education system, which is just absolutely bizarre when you think about the original purpose of public education is civic education. And in a way, the system of higher ed is almost taken as its mission the destruction of civic life rather than its perpetuation. It's a very bizarro, upside down world in that sense.
Well, let's take a second and delve into that, because we have had one conversation on history of education, but I was involved in that in a practical manner, STEM, and whether we thought the Chinese were taking over the world or whether we're just couldn't build stuff like we used to, there was an immense pressure to have every kindergartner through college kid worry about engineering and math and science and all the rest of it be damned. And it's not like we didn't totally care. It's just we have to do better in building stuff. I was a part of that when I was the CEO of a chamber and working with major corporations in Colorado. And that resonates with me. Who cares about history? We got to build a bridge or a dam. So is that what you're talking about?
Yes and no. I mean, I would never disparage the what we would in California call STEM fields. They're fine, fine fields of study. There's seem wonderful, but the whole idea of higher education is not supposed to be technical training. It's not really, everybody seems to think that the reason you go to college is to get a job. And then at the same time, curriculum at every level is has just been destroyed. And my students, when I teach at Ashland, are all teachers, and I think they would all, every time I talk to them, these are high school teachers and in some cases junior high school teachers from all over the country, and they're the best teachers in America. These are the ones who deliberately sought out a content-based master's degree instead of getting an easy credential from some place that would just stamp it out. So these are the best teachers in the world, and one of the feedback that they give constantly is they can't believe what they didn't know. They can't believe what they weren't taught as part of getting a bachelor's degree and being stuck in a classroom. There's this idea somehow that you must have content knowledge in order to build a bridge, but you don't need content knowledge in order to talk about the American past. And I always put it this way: how can you teach something you don't know? It seems like an absolute absurdity. You can't teach something to someone else if you don't yourself know it.
Right.
I'll put it another way. The sort of trickle down is I was dealing with a couple of my students last week, and we've been told so often that they don't need to know anything because they can look it up. But the problem is that they don't look it up. And so two questions I got from two separate students. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but one of them asked on the syllabus, it says what the duration of the class is. And they asked what the word duration meant. And a third of the class didn't know what the word duration meant. Another student asked what a dash was. I said, well, when you turn in your paper, if you do it incorrectly, instead of seeing a paper icon, you'll see a dash. And students, they don't know what a dash is. I just mean this to say, there is no way to underestimate, or no matter what you have in your imagination as an overestimation of what people don't know, it's far, far worse than anything you've ever imagined.
Okay, but on that theme,
and by the way, and no one's interested in fixing this, right? Which is the other piece of it.
Well, there's two of us at least, but but on that theme, almost every conversation I have told you that I didn't know that. And I have a political science degree. It's not a history degree, but it's a version of history,
Yeah.
and a law degree, which is a version of history in two specified fields, politics and law. And I don't know all sorts of stuff about the founding of our country and our founding documents.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the fact that 2/3 of Americans are making decisions about the future of this country and don't know that we have 3 branches of government.
It's really bad stuff, not my level of ignorance.
Yeah, I'm not talking about people who don't remember how the War of 1812 ended. I'm talking about you're demanding things of your government and you don't even know what your government's supposed to be doing or how it functions. I mean, my friends who were I used to have friends who were kind of congressional staffers at the local level. And almost 100% of their job is just telling people that's not what this level of government does. Redirecting them to where they, where they should go.
I had a conversation with Bill. You'll appreciate this, with former Congressman Bob Schaefer this last week, and his comment to me on this. And I'm asking the people I'm talking to whether I can use their name and quote or not. And he goes, "Oh, everything I ever do is I want it to be public and quotable." And he's a principal of a very successful charter school. In fact, the best charter school in Colorado, if my memory is correct.
Is it Ridgeview?
To be quoted. And he said,
Liberty Common.
What's that?
It's Liberty Common.
Yeah, Liberty Common in Colorado.
There used to be an outstanding one up in Fort Collins too.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, if you want to go up there and tour it with me, Professor, next time you're in Colorado, I'll wait and do it with you if that interests you. Yeah. But he said that neither the Republican Party or the Democratic Party believes in the very basis of what the United States was founded. They have zero. We're not talking about it in any way, Republicans nor Democrats, and haven't been for the last 20 years. The whole thing is a farce. That wasn't the quote, but that was the overall meaning. He said we got to get back to having politicians be educators, in addition to being advocates. I mean, sure, they need to campaign and they need to get elected, but they really need to be educators because people just don't understand our system. So you're saying the same thing.
Yeah, but also when we get to the responses, people tend to become reactionaries. So they say, "Oh, well, you hate America. We need to now do viewpoint discrimination in the other direction." And you say, "Well, no, hold on, like no, that's not the solution," if you think about how people somehow believe that the solution is to become a reactionary the other way, when really the old standards are just fine. We don't need some sort of new idea that somehow, if the left has destroyed higher education, so now we need the right to do it like that. No, I don't want right wingers to destroy education in America any more than I want left wingers to do it. The underlying principle is that to learn this stuff and participate in free and open inquiry and not engage in viewpoint discrimination for your side or against your side.
That's a whole ponder. Let me ask the question a little bit more pointedly.
Yeah.
Right now, with the whole world's knowledge, if you know the right questions to ask and the right technical refinement, or an AI tool, I guess you can find the answer if you have the desire and willingness and some techniques in order to find the answer. That does distinguish ourselves from the 50s or 1900s or 1850s, right? The world's knowledge wasn't available to the common man, right? I mean, that's a distinguishing characteristic where we're at. Maybe we just haven't learned how to sort properly. And you've used in other conversations, maybe we need more editors. We need more, I don't, there was a different word besides editors, but
it's now I'm dancing with you. You got me thinking. Because what AI can do, and I apologize in advance because you're asking an interesting question. So I've got to think this through. But what AI can do is it can go out and aggregate conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom can answer a lot of questions, but what it can't do is it can't put together information in a creative, original way, especially when something involves original research. Every time we do one of these talks, I pull out books to stack my computer on so it'll be a little higher. And I'm staring at 1, 2, 3, 4 books that were all the result of original research that AI couldn't have produced because it involved putting archival information together in a creative way. I mean, doing the slow, laborious, painstaking work of a historian. Each of these books probably the result of 20 years of a human being doing research, and thinking about how to put ideas together. And AI still can't do that. But what it can do is it can go out and find what people have already said and put it all together. And in a sense, comparing that to different ages is a little bit interesting because it wasn't so much that in previous eras, human beings did or didn't have access to information,
Well, I got to stop you at a certain point. That's not true. When you didn't speak Latin and you go to church and you're just
Sure.
listening to your priest only.
Oh, yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of like after a Carnegie Library was within 100
cool.
miles of you,
That's helpful.
you could go to a library and it took a long time. I think about the research that I did for my master's and my PhD that all involved like microfilm and the kind of things that I found in both projects I wouldn't find today because of the way the search tools are organized. Because back in the day, I had to go and look at the actual microfilm of the whole newspaper or the whole document. And now all of that stuff has been digitized and it just brings up the article. But a lot of the things that shaded how I saw the past where, I would see what else was in that newspaper, what documents were next to it in the file. And those things were informing the context of my interpretation. So it isn't so much that knowledge wasn't being stored in a way that you could access it, let's say 30 years ago, and then you go back 50 years and 100 years, and the other thing is that it seemed like, well, it didn't seem, there was less human knowledge to aggregate. So at the time of the founders, you could belong to a couple of scientific and philosophical societies and be pretty well up on all the discoveries in the world. So being an educated person seemed like a more attainable goal because there was simply less to know or less information out there. So what the AI can really do is it can aggregate what's out there, but it still can't generate the creative impulses that move us, and it can't do the hard, painstaking 20-year-long research and contextualizing involved in creating one of these works of history. So I guess I'm just going to punt it back to you and say, I don't know. It's interesting to think about our relationship between what can be known and the filters and the context of how we know it.
So let me interrupt with an oddity. For some reason, I accidentally set up a second Twitter account a year or two ago, or 6 months ago or 5 years ago. I don't know how it is, but for some reason a button got clicked and now I have 0 friends on it, I think. So the AI or the Twitter feed algorithm is sending me news on what they think I may think. And maybe they know I have a second account, or maybe they see that I have a law degree. I don't know how they do it. Maybe they know who I am better than I know who I am. but I get all this crazy stuff. Yeah, I get all these people. Bill, you probably like some of them, and I'm not being insulting, but they're crazy conservative stuff, and I really don't mean crazy. They're just very hard right stuff and conspiracy theories and all. And if that's all the news I had, which I get it, they send me an email too, and I get this every morning. And for some reason, I've been looking at it recently. And if that was my sole source, oh, I'd probably be pretty conservative and pretty crazy. And I am conservative, but I don't think I'm pretty crazy. Bill, this is not your turn to object. Anyway, it just seems like it's hard to determine what really is the truth now. And I'm talking about there's enough data points from enough doctors that make me question the COVID stuff and my inoculations. And I don't mean it in a paranoid way. I just mean I'm willing to listen to all sorts of information, but I would have to spend months to try to figure out the truth. I don't have time to read all the reports and the data. And in fact, I'd have a hard time reading them. So I guess I have to trust experts in a variety of fields and my spheres of influence. And I think I'm right, but I know a lot of people that totally disagree with me, and they're nice, thoughtful, educated people, and they seem to have a completely contrary view on race relations, on immunizations, on war, on the founding of our country. I mean, it's just all sorts of stuff. It's a really weird world right now, isn't it, Professor?
Yes, it is. I would say, and I was listening to a podcast of a pretty far left historian, and
well, let's interview he or she.
I don't know him personally. I was listening to, it's an old interview that was on the Glenn Lowry show, which I really enjoy, but one of my colleagues at work had recommended it. And that was actually because it was the guy who wrote the thing for the New York Times, that op-ed. And I was talking about it with one of my friends, and he said, well, he was on the Glenn show years ago or something. And so I went back and listened to that whole interview. And when he was talking about history, I just remember thinking, I disagree with every word that's coming out of your mouth from the very first sentence, and if I was in that conversation, I would have said, go back to the very first sentence you said, because I think you're wrong about that. And I have questions, it's in fact, something popped up in my Facebook memories. I'll share it later, but it was I wrote this thing apparently a few years ago where I said, this is the era of odd conversations. I'll share it again so you can see.
Yeah, I want to read that.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, no, but getting back to how this makes me feel out of touch is that, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, if you ask me what life is like, and I start thinking about it this way, everybody I work, not everybody, but the vast majority of people who I work with are really extraordinary. I mean, I'm just so lucky to go to work and interact with these people every day. All just anonymous teachers teaching anthropology and economics and philosophy and social work and stuff like that. And I just like, oh my gosh, these people are just extraordinary. America would be very proud to know what they are doing in the classroom with their students. And then I think about what are my neighbors like? And oh my gosh, my neighbors are the nicest, kindest, most thoughtful and generous and caring. And there's not a thing that I could ask of the 8 households closest to me where they would not, fall over themselves to help, in any way. But it seems so disconnected to once I get beyond those 8 houses, once we start getting orders from the state of California about what we're supposed to be doing in the classroom and who we're supposed to be hiring and how we're supposed to be measuring success. And everything that comes to us externally is completely absurd. And in some cases, not just absurd, but diabolical, I mean, evil in some cases. And you just think, how can there be so much injustice just beyond my periphery?
And without turning this whole show into that conversation, to summarize it, I think you're suggesting that state law or regulation would require you to be prejudiced or require you to be discriminatory in a way that you believe is unconstitutional or against good human nature.
I would say against all constitutional and moral law.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk. Let's not have that show about that, but that's worthy to keep bringing up, and maybe we should focus in on that as an item. Let me do a corollary of that. I had a 2-hour interview with a major newspaper, one of the big three. I think everyone would agree, whether they like it or not. It's still one of the big three. And at the end of the conversation, I want to be a little clear. I mean, she tape recorded the whole 2-hour conversation, so she can show that I was wrong or whatever, and I think that's great. But as we were walking away, she just asked some general questions, which is awesome. And this will be in one of those 5,000 word stories in a couple of weeks, one of those huge national newspapers, and over a very serious issue. She did say, well, John, how do you believe that? Or something. Neither of us were tape recording at the time, but she goes, how would you have that philosophy? Or what's your opinion on something like that? When we were founded when America was founded as a racist nation. And it's so interesting to me that we can view what you're talking about. She was a very pleasant person. I like it, admire her. I think she's smart. I think she's probably ethical, but her worldview is completely different than mine. And if we started with that, I don't know if I would have had the conversation, because I think it would be a hit piece or something. And it might turn out to be a hit piece. I don't know. We'll see in a couple of weeks. Very few conservatives would ever talk to this paper. And I, because I'm dumb, am willing to. But it seems like we are so, to your point, it seems like no one reads this paper that I know. But every one of my friends in Boulder, and I do have friends in Boulder, will read this paper. And not the paper you get delivered to your house every day. How do we survive when we have totally different worldviews and different sets of facts? How do we figure this out? We get mad at Congress for being crazy. Well, they're just reflective of us.
I need to think about what you said about having different sets of facts, because we don't actually have different sets of facts. What in some cases what we have are no facts, or facts put into different contexts for ideological purposes.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Because I mean, I would just say, if you believe that America was founded in slavery and racism, you would have to believe that the Civil War didn't take place. And I don't think that that's a matter of opinion that the Civil War took place, because when, Alexander Stephens was describing why they needed to rebel against the United States and found a new country, they said, we need to do this because the United States was not founded on the idea of slavery and racism, and we need to found a country based on slavery and racism. And it seems like a pretty obvious point that if somebody was declaring why they wanted to engage in rebellion, that they wouldn't have done it if the United States was in fact founded on slavery and racism.
But Professor, it's not just this one reporter.
I know.
It's a cultural phenomenon. Whether it's 40 to 60% of the country would disagree with this part of the conversation, would they not?
Yeah, of course.
Well, but how do we?
What am I supposed to do? That's what I said. Nobody wants a historian around. What we want is, we want to be able to Google me right. Even the way that good teachers in high school teach kids how to think is they do, what are the pros, what are the cons? Let's hear both sides of the issue. And I'm like, let's knock it off with this both sides, because it somehow implies that either this side or that side is right, or that the truth is somewhere in between, right? Black and white. And I always say, you're asking whether it's black and white, and you're saying that this person is wise for saying it's gray. I'm saying the answer might be banana. You're asking, who knows if you're even asking the right questions. You start with your research first, and let the research tell the story. And what you might find out is that the answer is not black, and it's not white, and it's not gray. It could be television set, or it could be banana. You don't know, but you've already introduced confirmation bias. And now one of the first things I feel like I always have to break my students of is they are taught, and this would be a good student, right? A good student who had great teachers and went to good high schools. How they are taught to think is pros, cons, right? Whatever, or both sides of the issue, and then how
Would
long.
it offend you though that resonates with me? I kind of think that way.
Yeah,
Is that-
well, I'd say stop it. Because because that's not that's not the way to put together ideas, because you're introducing the most powerful bias that a human being can have at the beginning of the process. You're saying, and then you think that if you go out and you Google it, right, that what you're going to get, shockingly enough, is you will get a bunch of sources that will support this thesis. And then if you say, well, now I need my cons, well, now you're going to get a bunch of sources that will support that thesis. And what you might never find out is that you're asking the wrong question.
Okay, let me do one more analogy, or one more anecdote.
I would also say that is something that GPT can do. So like, what's the point? Right. I'm saying the thing that human beings can do is we can look at information and begin to build this iceberg that then gives us this little, but it takes time, and it's slow, and and it doesn't flatter us. Sorry.
Same thing. And then Bill and Andrea, get ready to ask a question if you have it. But Professor, as you know, I've spent, I don't know, hundreds of hours in the last couple of years since we've known each other on race relations. And you've been outwardly what is that word? Predominantly influential in my opinion on this, and I'm still learning. You have almost a treatise on race relations, saying, great, glad you're interested, John, and whoever else. But before you really say stuff or engage or try to make a difference, do the following. And you list 10 books and 3 poems and 4 treatises and 12 people, and and read them. And then if you don't have enough time, read the Declaration and compare it to somebody's last speech. And read Martin Luther King's thing, but also read these 3 things, and Frederick Douglass this, and it's more articulate than I'm just kind of summarizing. I looked at it 2 years ago. And so I have started a very slow process of reading Edmund Morgan, American Freedom, American Slavery, which, by the way, changed my whole perspective of the founding of our country. That one book. Now, does that mean it's authoritative? I don't know. Maybe there's a book maybe there's a con to Edmund Morgan's.
Well, it's not so much that there's a con, but there are other really brilliant historians who also spent 30 years looking at that issue. And then when you read their books, you realize, oh, they kind of agree with Morgan here, they kind of disagree here. And then what you can do as a human being, you start saying, oh, well, I see that here's where, here's something that is clearly they don't even disagree with, or whatever. And what you find is that once you start dealing with the issues with experts at that level, that some of the fundamental assumptions that people make about this country are just so wildly and factually incorrect. But the answers are too complicated to explain.
Well, so Professor, to your point and your diminishing value as a historian, sorry. If I am one of your friends, and maybe I'm sure you have another non-historian friend who's read some of your suggestions, but I put out there, hey, let's read these books and do these things. And I bet somebody has, but they haven't told me. I think it's kind of hard. It's a long, thick book. I happen to enjoy it, but it's not an easy read. It's not a Supreme Court decision difficulty read. It's a read, but it's not a romance novel read. It's difficult. There's names and places and things and facts and ideas, and I found it to be thoroughly enjoyable. But I don't know if anybody's willing to take this time to do what I have attempted to do, to understand your ideas. And you just don't believe me, read a bunch of stuff and then ask me questions, John. That's what your point was. I mean, do some of your own homework. Don't just have everything spoon fed to you. What's your role? I mean, is it to help inspire one of your kids or all your kids, or you know you need to go down to the State House and in California to change the law, or no, you need to be involved in campaigns, or, you know, because the legislators are wrong, or no, you need to write a book, or you need to go on Oprah. I know she's not around anymore, or not doing her Oprah thing, but you know, or no, you need to start cursing. I've run into a historian called, I think it's James Fell, who's a cursing historian. And that's kind of interesting. It's a shtick, and he's supposedly a bestseller because he curses. So how do you become relevant again? What is your role in making a powerful impact in society? Because that's why we both met at AEI. We're not doing this out of just pure love. We care about America and we want to make a difference. So how do we help each other? Bill, how do you help the professor? Andy, you guys are going to totally disagree here in a second. But anyway, how do you help the professor be relevant?
Is that for me or is that for them?
Anyone that wants to jump in. Bill, you have your microphone off. You can ask any comment or make any kind of question.
Well, yeah, obviously I'll get into it because I wanted to listen to some of this today because of kind of the title of the whole thing. And it reminded me of a movie that wound up being nominated for Academy Awards the other morning. And it's like, the title is something like Everything, Everywhere, all the time.
Once.
In other words, this is the whole freaking universe, John, that you picked to talk about today.
Yeah.
It's the whole universe to me, the whole thing, everything you could. So I'm going to start off with just talking that I just, to keep grounded, I just buy into fundamentals. I'm warmer today because we have the investment, the science, the fortitude to actually drill for natural gas. And that's just, I can be warm today because of that. And I can drive my car today because we get oil in too. And because of those fuels, we can grow food so we can eat. And I just have to be really, really grounded as to those kinds of facts in life so that I don't fall for all kinds of other nonsense out there. And you can become more and more factually based, I think, that way. Because there's plenty, all kinds of things to be concerned about all over the board. I'm reminded by our governance problems, by the fact that one of the founders said, we're just in search of a more perfect union. You know, you never completely get there. We humans, we're not designed to ever get to total perfection on any of this stuff, as grandiose or obtuse as it might be. You just can't possibly ever get there.
You know, the democracy breaks your heart 49 out of 100 times. And sometimes it's just discouraging when it's 49 times straight.
Yeah.
Who said that, Professor?
Well, I don't know if I made that up or if I paraphrased somebody else.
Okay.
There's certainly questions about democracy itself, but that's subjects you've covered other times. I guess I'd love to see one week, John, about oil and gas. So I think that would be fun as well. But I don't even know where to begin with the various comments I would have for you.
Yeah, I think a history of energy policy would be good, Commissioner. I don't think we've done that directly, so thank you. Bill, let me ask you a question though. Are you optimistic of where we are in society? I think you've even moved states, haven't you? You're not even in Colorado anymore, are you?
Texas right now, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you did sorting. You wanted to be around a bunch more conservatives, right?
There's a lot of conservatives here, but you know what? Just all kinds of anomalies all the time. Yesterday or the day before, the days run together out here, of course. I think it was yesterday. I went to a military group that were reviewing books, and to a man, and we're almost all veterans, and they talked about not letting history repeat itself. And sure enough, they were all saying what a mistake jumping into Iraq was, for example.
Ah,
Why didn't we learn more from Vietnam? Why didn't we have a clear set of objectives, realize we weren't going to nation build in Afghanistan? We weren't going to change those people because Islam and you name it, all kinds of different reasons that they weren't likely to get changed as we were 250 years ago and, seeking our own self-governance. So what I found there was openness with a bunch of, frankly, 65 to 85-year-old men, openness to the fact that American military policy isn't always right or perfect because they've been there and done that. So, yeah, we're conservative out here where I'm living. 3 out of every 4 votes where I live went for Greg Abbott for governor, for example.
mm-hmm.
And because the alternative was not grounded in reality, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Probably enough for me for now.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see that you didn't think Weld County was conservative enough for you, so you moved to Texas.
I'll never forget
Actually, well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I lived in Weld County for 2 years, and I'll never forget the feeling you would get when you would cross over that county line between, was it Weld and Arapahoe? Because you would just
Adams.
Weld and Adams, maybe.
Maybe. And what's the one that where the borders around Denver?
Brighton,
Adams and
Brighton,
Arapahoe.
Adams.
Okay. And boy, you just see the housing just stop. And it was like you have just left Weld County. They don't build houses in this county, but they build them in this county.
Weld is one of the fastest growing counties in the state.
Yeah.
It pops well over 300,000 people now.
It really was pretty incredible. Yeah, I lived in
And
Green.
90% of the oil, and #1 in agriculture production too.
Wow.
Very grounded things we do there.
Yeah, including your new congresswoman, right, Bill?
Our new congresswoman, I wish that she wasn't.
I didn't mean a barb. It's just interesting how that election turned out, because we both know former Commissioner Kirkmeyer, who didn't win. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into that. Andy, I know you don't like labels, or maybe you do like labels. I don't know, but you're a free thinker. But is it true that in general terms, you're pretty out there liberal?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Not progressive, but liberal.
Yeah. So you've heard this conversation, and the 3 other people that have spoken are generally conservative, although Bill would probably challenge my credentials. What are it can be on a different tact. I've given you a couple, war and race relations and, things that are important to me, but can you give some reaction to this conversation? And do you just think we're off our rocker, or?
No, I don't think anybody's off their rocker. The thing that was most interesting to me so far in this conversation is the difficulty of being a historian in today's times. And I think if you had a mediocre education like I did, all I got was the textbooks. I never got the original. I never was asked to read the original source. And then from that, I went into a life where I had 4 hours a night that was free for me. And part of that was like getting ready for tomorrow. You work all day, you commute, you're exhausted at the end of it. And I was not in any position. I didn't have the energy to read original sources at that point in my life. I'm more willing to now, but I think the students that he gets in his classroom are better students, okay? But still, they didn't get that education either. And now we're in times move so fast and everything goes so fast, and you hear this side's opinion and that side's opinion, but you never go to the original data or the original thoughts of great thinkers. So I don't know what to say about it. We're just stuck here.
Yeah, well, there was no sort of golden age of education. I don't want to somehow imply that.
Oh, sure. You sure Plato and Aristotle sitting around in robes on a rock?
Yeah, he's wrong about a lot of stuff. But I would say there's never, in some ways, we are in a golden age of history writing, but at the same time, it's never been less a part of the curriculum that a regular person would ever see, which is just a real shame. Because for so long, frankly, the sort of Southern racist narrative and distortions that they had introduced into, and not just the Southern and racist, but also the progressive tradition, it had so, twisted American history that it took a long time to, and I would say we're still not really finished with this, like to disentangle a lot of those elements from our understanding of our own past. And in some ways, I would even say we're really only at the beginning of it. Sometimes when I see a Supreme Court decision or how things end up looking in a textbook, I have to remind myself, well, this is kind of wrong, but gosh, it's better than what they put out in the 70s or the 60s, or, and I'm sometimes encouraged. There's a funny thing. I have this one assignment about the origins of the Civil War, and my students have to go out and find history articles.
Oh no, this is not the Ching Chang.
No.
Okay.
That's over with, by the way. I think they took that blog down, but
darn it.
but
That's a funny little sub story.
But I always think it's funny that one of the articles on the origins of the Civil War that they find that's still the best one was written in like the 1870s. Because that was before everything kind of got messed up with the progressive and Southern version of history twisting what had actually happened when the Civil War started, and so in some ways, if you want to know how the Civil War started, you can read a history article from the 1870s, or you can read one from 2023, but you should probably skip that that little 100-year period in between. And I shouldn't overstate that, because frankly, most of the mainstream journals now don't publish a lot of stuff that's of much use. It's pretty depressing. I haven't been to the OAH or the AHA, the American Historical Association, or the Organization of American Historians. I haven't been in years, but every now and then I'll just look at the titles and look at the subjects and what's going on, and I just think there's nothing for me here. But I see the work that's actually being done, and it's pretty darn. There's so much good stuff out there now. It's just I sometimes wonder if it isn't just howling in the wilderness, or to be honest, some dentist in Cleveland probably has a better history education than someone who's a history major who graduates from the flagship research university in their state. It's we live in weird times.
We live in weird times.
I mean that seriously. So let me see if I want to overstate this for comic effect, but if I talk to, I have a buddy who liberal guy, Democrat, and but he reads everything, and I would say he has a better history education than anybody I know who just got a bachelor's degree by following the prescribed education of any flagship state university. And that's that. It shouldn't be that way, really, right? Don't we find that a little strange?
Yeah, it reminds me of my father, by the way. You may have seen a post a few years ago. His hardback library is probably 500 books, and his library on World War II is at least 100 books on World War II. 100 100 books on one war.
Yeah.
And he didn't have he had a high school diploma, but not a college degree.
Right. And I bet, yeah, I bet he could run circles around the average history major. It's just true.
All right, Tony, you often can form a kind of a bridge or a summation of what you've heard. Let's see if you can do that today. What's your question or comment?
Well, I appreciate the conversation, the perspective, as always. And one of the things that I was thinking about while we were talking is that it seems as if it's really hard to be binary, if you will, about, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Are you progressive or a liberal? Are you conservative? You know, like these kinds of things. And the same can be said, like a little bit of what I heard Professor Tootle say was about history. And like the more we dig in, the less easy it is to be convinced one way or another. I mean, like we come in with a set of maybe beliefs or understandings, and then the more that we kind of educate ourselves, at least for me, the more I'm like, wow, I guess I don't know what I think about this, you know, and I'm now formulating a new opinion. You know, it isn't as easy to just say, hey, this is a black and white issue, because human beings are involved, history is involved. And so I think that's a lot of what I'm kind of thinking about as we're talking. And it reflects a conversation I had with my brother. He's a big pharmaceutical guy, and they do all this like data stuff. And there's so much data out there right now, information, that it's super important to find a way to kind of understand or filter what matters, you know? So, so maybe that isn't a good bridge or even concise, but that's what I'm thinking. I don't know that I have a question about it, you know, but I just was putting that out there.
You know, and I think one of the things, as I reflect on what we've talked about over these 55 shows, I think one of the things that has come out is how important it is to focus on principles rather than issues. You know, what are the fundamental principles that we want to organize our decision-making process around? And then one of the other things I think ties us all together, it's funny, you know, because we say, oh, you know, this person's a liberal, this person's a conservative, you know, but these labels that sort of divide us. But what you find once you scratch the surface of almost every participant who's ever spoken up over the past 55 episodes, what they all have in common is a humility and grace about how to approach governing principles, you know, a recognition that in fact, oh, you know, yes, I know what I want the end result to be, you know, but if you think about the long-term decision-making principles, you know, instead of focusing on what level of government, you know, we can all agree that we want people to live happy and thriving lives, but if you start asking these questions honestly, what is it that produces that? And then you start looking at the data and you start saying, well, you know, gosh, a lot of it has to do with love. And what is it appropriate to have the federal department of somebody loves you? You know, like I don't know that we get to that point where we say like abstractions and institutions can't love you, but we don't get to in our regular lives, we don't get to have those kinds of conversations with people. So I think the kind of people who participate in this conversation are the kind of people who get to that point and say, you know what, you're right, boy, maybe I was framing my question the wrong way.
Well, I also think the other issue that kept coming up in this conversation I had with my brother yesterday was trust. You know, like, I mean, I think it could be replaceable, trust, love, whatever, but it's that same phenomenon. You know, at some point you just get to it and you're like, well, yeah, you have to, like we were talking about managerial relationships and data and stuff like that. And it was like, pretty much the core principle is trust, you know, like, and the trust and love motivate growth, you know, like, and learning. those kinds of.
And also, you know what it means to trust someone. It doesn't mean that you're bestowing Christ-like knowledge to somebody. You know, I could list, there's another historian named John Mosier, and I always say, or Stephen Knott, and I always say, like, we always tend to kind of come down very similarly on questions, and but that doesn't mean that I think that John Mosier or Stephen Knott are right about everything. I just sort of, but I know that they're good guys, and I know what they're, or I can say a journalist who I really like, or I can say, here's a podcast I really like, Advisory Opinions with Sarah Isger and David French, and but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that Sarah Isger and David French says. Yeah, but I trust them to be themselves, and I trust that the end result of listening to them is going to be a net positive. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff that's mostly right, and I don't know, 5% wrong. But the other thing is, most of these people, they come back 2 weeks later and say, oh, here's the stuff we were wrong about. But you got to hold the truth rather loosely. Argue vigorously, but hold those things loosely. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before. I think I've talked about Isaiah Berlin. He's this great liberal philosopher he's British, Russian-born British philosopher. And in one of his essays, he described how human beings experience the truth as being similar to how a fish experiences being in the Mississippi River. Meaning, you're a fish, you don't know how long that river is. You don't actually know that it ends up in New Orleans. You don't know if you might be in a left-hand turn that's facing east or west, or that might be one of those crazy parts where the river is actually facing north for a while. But there's a current, and that you're swimming, and that's pretty much how human beings have to approach the knowledge that we receive. And so there should be a little bit of humility about it. And I always say, like, it took me a long time to I guess faith is a lifelong journey, but to really think about faith, because one of the things I'd kind of learned from history is that anytime you're trusting your feelings above all else, you might be at a Nazi rally or something, because the emotion and feeling, this can all be manipulated. And so I never wanted to join a group that was chanting anything all at once, that was doing any saluting, so always have just a little bit of that contrarian, let's make sure that we're not, or there's an old comic bit. I wish I could remember if it was Blackadder. It was some British thing where you got two Nazi soldiers sitting next to each other, and they said, we got these skull and crossbones, and are we the baddies? Like, are we the bad guys? I think every now and then you got to say, are we the bad guys? Approach how much we know about life with a lot of humility, and say, well, you know what? I'm going to stick, as Bill was saying, right? Let's stick to some basic things. Like, here's what I know. I'm going to go ahead and learn the Declaration. I'm going to know that if somebody is telling me that all men are not created equal, then the hair on the back of my neck is going to stand up. And if somebody says that human beings shouldn't be able to govern themselves, that's going to send off my spidey sense. And if somebody is saying that, this is why I always say Calvin Coolidge is the guy we should all be reading. If all men are created equal, that is final. If we're endowed by our creators with inalienable rights, that is final. No progress can be made beyond those propositions. Like there is no such thing as progress. And as I think Bill also said, our system of government promises to never solve a problem. You know, it's only totalitarian systems that solve problems. Pluralistic systems don't solve problems because the human beings are infinitely complex. And so all we can do is work on it, make it a little bit better, and then test it and say, well, now how's this going? You know, and then you say, well, we got this right and we got this wrong. And say, all right, well, let's fix one thing. I always tell my students, like, if you want to be the smartest kid in class, you want to be the smartest kid in college, fix one thing and then turn in your next assignment. And if you just fix one thing every time, pretty soon you're going to be getting A's in all your classes, because most people don't have the humility to say, what did I do wrong? What's right? What's wrong? I'm going to fix one thing and then try again.
All I can picture is Bill tinkering with a piece of farm equipment, trying to get it working again so he can go plow the field or something. Just keep working, fix the one thing and then see if it works. Then,
well, Anthony will appreciate, there's the farm, you know, fixing your tractor. But I had a buddy who was a studio engineer, and you'd get these gremlins. He'd say, where is this noise coming from? And he'd just say, signal path. You know, like you just go all the way back and you follow that signal path until you find that noise. and then like you have no choice but to break it down, fix one thing, try it again. And it's long, it's slow, it's grinding work, and ChatGPT won't do it for you.
Well, I'm not sure if I succeeded in the goal of taking a current look at today's issues and comparing it to historical issues in the past.
Well,
But I do think there was some insightful thoughts on human nature and what we can do to learn more to be a better citizen. You know, maybe it is just to read one article, you know.
well, and what Ms. Cassidy said is so true. You know, like people work, people have kids. You know, there are some days when I'm so tired that like I face plant straight in my bed, and like I'm not. What do you think of it? Studying philosophy? You know, no, I just want to put on a football game, and to be honest, I'm as nervous about the 49ers this weekend as I am almost anything else. You know, like that's what's really going on in the back of my mind is Jalen Hurts. And can we keep him contained, and will we still be able to score, because you know he's going to break containment at least once, you know, and when is that going to happen? You know, and how's Nick Bosa going to do, right? Jaywan Jennings, you know, the Philadelphia is not great against the third or slot receiver, so are we, you know, it's not all high-minded in rattling it around up here.
Yeah, that's helpful as well. Bill, Andy, Andrea, Tony, thank you for joining us today. Bill, as you suggested, a topic, I think we'll do that soon. And so I'll specifically make sure you're invited on that one. I think you're in the group. That's how you signed up today. So Tootle Talks on Facebook and Spotify and YouTube. And then Facebook. Yeah. So anyway, thank you all for joining us. As you know, I'm going to do some familial care. Professor, I sure appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's good to see you guys. Hope to see all of you back.
Thank you, John.
I'd love to your mom, John.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
send her my best. Yeah.
Pleasure all. Thank you for caring about our society.
Thanks.
Cheers.